Hello. Some of you might have realised already, but I've been making some longer videos, which is a lot more time consuming. So to get these videos out, I've acquired some help. If you want to support the channel, a great way to do so would be through Patreon, and we do have some exclusive videos over there too. If you want to check that out, the link will be pinned in the description. Pinned in the comments. Thank you. This case takes place in the United Kingdom in the year 2019. Joseph McCann was born on the 8th of February 1985 in London, England. He was one of three brothers, with Scottish roots on their father's side and Irish traveller heritage on the mother's side. His older brother Sean is 2 years his senior, and his younger brother Michael is 2 years younger. The McCann brothers were mostly raised by their mother, with minimal presence of a strong male role model. The family relocated from London to Manchester, settling in a council house in East Manchester. The Beswick Council Estate was known as the Land of the Forgotten. Their childhood was marked by instability and frequent encounters with criminal activities. Joseph McCann's schooling was equally unstable, as he moved between various schools without a steady and supportive educational setting. Information on his childhood is limited, with most accounts highlighting his delinquent behaviour and escalating criminal conduct. This case begins with Joseph causing fear in a local community and ends with a nationwide manhunt for one of the UK's most dangerous criminals. Joseph's criminality began at a very young age. By age 11, Joseph and his brothers had gained a notorious reputation within the Beswick estate. Despite their young age and small stature, they instilled fear in their neighbours, leaving a trail of intimidation behind them. They would deliberately target younger peers attending homework clubs or walking the streets, and they would steal their belongings. They threatened and intimidated the local elderly residents, causing many to avoid going out to collect their pensions. In 1996, Joseph had his first official brush-up with authorities. He was arrested upon suspicion of theft. The specifics are unclear, but it is known that he was not charged with this offence. Over the next 2 years, complaints from the locals began to accumulate. The brothers would regularly vandalise cars, set them on fire, and smash their windows. They committed muggings and eventually escalated to aggravated vehicle theft and driving without a licence. The impact and damage these boys inflicted on their community was immense. Many adults were driven into their homes too scared to leave. Some residents would later say that they would just watch them commit crime from their windows. Residents reported that the boys broke into abandoned houses and stole the boilers before the new tenants moved in. The boys frequently robbed from shops with impunity. They didn't even try to disguise what they were doing. They would just walk in and take whatever they wanted. The boys recruited other members to join them in their antisocial behaviour, but Joseph was something of a leader to them all. However, little did the youths know that 5 of the locals began to collect evidence regarding their hostilities and criminal activity. Eventually, the local council was informed and a case was made to stop them. It took some time, but the council bosses set up cameras to build more of a concrete case against them. These videos captured the boys wrecking more cars, vandalising property, and hurling bricks at workers. A picture of the brothers jumping on a car even made the local newspaper headlines. In 1998, when Joseph was only 13 years old, their offences were judged as a breach of the tenancy agreement. As a result, their homes were immediately repossessed by the Manchester City Council. Not only this, but Joseph experienced his first criminal convictions for shoplifting. Unfortunately, this was not accompanied by juvenile detention or any form of rehabilitation. The McCann family was relocated to an estate 2 miles away called Ardwick. However, moving the McCann brothers did not stop them from wreaking havoc on the estate in Beswick. They simply got on public transport or stole some bikes and commuted straight back to their stomping grounds. In 1999, Home Secretary Jack Straw introduced the Antisocial Behaviour Order to address the societal menaces. These measures were designed to tackle behaviours such as intimidation, drunkenness, and violence by individuals and families, using civil orders rather than criminal penalties. These were known as Asbos. The McCann brothers were issued some of the first ever Asbos. It prevented them from using or engaging in any abusive, insulting, offensive, threatening, or intimidating language or behaviour in any public place in Manchester. This made national news. However, when the McCann brothers left the courts, they posed rather aptly for the paparazzi photo shoot. With huge grins on their faces, they all stuck 2 fingers up to the cameras, as if nothing was achieved to stop them that day. Following this, the McCann family relocated back to London. From there, Joseph committed an additional 11 crimes across Norfolk, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and Manchester. These crimes had now escalated and included possessions of bladed articles, dangerous driving, and robbery. And as he got older, he was no longer protected by child or minor status. This resulted in his arrest. On the 29th of July 2004, he was sentenced to 62 months imprisonment. Whilst in prison, the authorities had intercepted 2 letters, which had extremely disturbing and graphic content. One letter contained threats to exploit teenage girls, stating that he wants a clean young girl when released from prison. The letter pointed towards collusion with his family, instructing them to find a young girl for when he was released. The other letter was addressed to his offender manager, a person whose role is to assess his likelihood of reoffending. This letter was a direct threat that he would SA them. In 2007, whilst he was still in prison, his girlfriend gave birth to his eldest boy. This would be a great opportunity and reason for many criminals to turn their life around. After 38 months in prison, he was released on the 13th of September 2007. He made little to no effort to see his new son and partner. Joseph was released on license. This means that he was no longer deemed a threat to society and could serve the remainder of the prison sentence out of prison, with additional terms and conditions. It appears that there was an error at the National Probation Service, and the letters detailing Joseph's vile intent towards his offender manager never surfaced during his review. This error would not come to light for many years. Upon his release, Joseph moved to Bedford, and he was kept under the supervision of a different offending manager to the one that he had threatened. The offending manager's role was to make sure that he was recalled to prison if he fell foul to the terms of the license agreement. True to form, on the 2nd of November 2007, Joseph did exactly that. The specifics of this are unclear. However, he was recalled to prison. Joseph avoided this request and he went on the run. On the 27th of December 2007, when Joseph was 23 years old, he decided to rob a home in Colton End near Bedford. This was the home of a frail 85-year-old man. Joseph callously threatened him with a knife, saying that he would stab the man in the eye if he did not give up his money. Having no choice, the man gave up his wallet and avoided violence. The crime was reported to the police, and they had suspicions that the robber was indeed Joseph. On the 15th of January 2008, Joseph was seen on CCTV in the Bedford area near where the crime was committed. The police located and arrested him for aggravated burglary and the breach of his license. Joseph pleaded guilty to the aggravated assault charge and was sentenced to a year later on the 26th of September 2008. Joseph claimed that he was thoroughly ashamed of what he had done. He claimed his goal was to live a crime-free life, as his previous sentence had prevented him from being present at the birth of his first child. And by this point, his partner was pregnant again. With everything considered, the judge saw Joseph as a dangerous man. He was sentenced to an indeterminate sentence for public protection with a minimum tariff of 30 months. This is similar to a life sentence, meaning that the parole board can only authorize release if they believe the prisoner's risk can be safely managed in the community. Serving the minimum tariff does not guarantee release. In 2009, Joseph reconvened his exchange of letters to friends and families outside of prison, again with graphic, violent, and intimate content. These were brought to the attention of the offending manager, who at the time decided to assess him as posing a high risk to the public. In 2010, Joseph applied for parole, but his request was denied. In 2011, as the 30-month minimum tariff was approaching, Joseph reapplied for parole, but during this time they discovered the letters he had written in 2003. Unsurprisingly, his application was rejected again in 2012 as a result. By 2014, Joseph had served nearly double his minimum tariff, but the parole board was not convinced of his commitment to rehabilitation. During this time, he had been violent towards others, possessed contraband and bladed weapons, and he had even tried to escape. As a result, he was transferred to another prison. This was an all too familiar story for the McCann brothers. His older brother Sean was serving a 2-year prison sentence for assault, but on the 13th of March 2016, Sean took his own life. Sean had a history of mental health disorders and had already tried to take his own life twice in the weeks prior. It came to light that the correct procedures had not been put in place by the prison service, and his death could have been avoided. The family, including Joseph, were furious and distraught. To convince authorities he could be safely released, Joseph McCann completed various rehabilitation programs. These included thinking skills, victim awareness, and building healthy relationships. He was transferred to Wilmot Prison in Lancashire, a unit for inmates with complex offending needs, including those with personality disorders, to aid with his rehab. So by his 4th parole hearing, probation and prison officials reported that Joseph's behaviour had improved. Consequently, he was released in March of 2017 on the condition that he would initially stay at an approved premises, abide by a curfew, undergo drug testing, and inform authorities of any new relationships. And of course, like last time, he was placed back on license. Therefore, any wrongdoing would send him straight back to prison. At the end of his approved premises stay, he was allowed to move back to Buckinghamshire, where he lived with a couple of his relatives. However, by July of 2018, Joseph started moving between other residences in Manchester and Hertfordshire. With this, the offending manager lost track of where he was. This broke the conditions of his license. Not only this, it didn't take him long before he was to commit another crime. Joseph and an accomplice raided a house, stole the car keys, and drove off with 2 BMWs. On the 18th of August 2017, he was arrested and convicted of car theft and burglary. In January of 2018, he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. The judge at the time was aware that he had broken the license for the previous prison sentence. The judge ruled that his new sentence and the previous one for which he was on license for would run concurrently. However, there were a number of mistakes that happened, and catastrophically, Joseph was released halfway through his sentence, after 18 months on the 15th of February 2019. Joseph had spent the majority of his time since 2003 in prison, being free for less than 1 year. He was an obvious threat to society, and his release only allowed Joseph to cause even more harm. But this time, however, things were about to escalate to a level that would place Joseph among Britain's most dangerous criminals. Following his release, there was one condition. This condition was that he could not form any new relationships with females. However, despite this, Joseph began a relationship with a new partner, and the two tried to secure some social housing. Their attempt to obtain social housing was unsuccessful, and this attempt to get the housing made authorities aware that he had started a new relationship without alerting the offending manager. The offending management soon found out, and the response from them was to issue a warning letter on the 10th of April and a face-to-face on the 18th of April. The authorities knew that Joseph was a threat to women, and not enough was done. In the coming days, Joseph proved to the world how dangerous he truly was and still is. and highlighted the terrible failings within the National Probation Service. On the 21st of April 2019 at 3:30 AM, Joseph noticed a girl walking the street in Watford, North London. She was a 21-year-old woman making her way back home after a night out. Joseph startled her and told her to get into his car immediately. He forced her into his car, threatening to stab her if she tried to escape, and that he would hit her if she did not stop crying. While driving, Joseph falsely accused the woman, whom he called Haley, of harming his little sister. Joseph parked up in a library car park and told this woman that men were coming to beat her up for what she did to his little sister. But in an attempt to manipulate her, he said that this wouldn't happen if he told the men that she had slept with him and snorted some illegal substances. He next forced her to expose herself, taking photographs while he threatened her, claiming that he had a gun. Joseph eventually drove the young woman back to the place of her abduction and allowed her to retrieve her bag. She showed him her driving license to prove that she was not called Haley in an effort to stop this attack, but this only revealed her home address. Joseph then drove her to her home and forced himself upon her on her own bed. He repeatedly told this woman that he had a knife in his pocket and that he would use it if she resisted. Finally, Joseph let her go and he fled from her home. The poor woman was put through an incredibly horrific false imprisonment and a series of essays for over 5 hours. The police were informed and the woman underwent the relevant tests that victims have to be put through after a person has forced themselves upon them. But this was the first time that Joseph McCann had essayed a person, and his DNA was not on the register. The police began looking for the culprit, but Joseph was still at large and was hell-bent on a spree of pure destruction. Just after midnight on the 25th of April 2019, a 25-year-old woman was walking through North London, having worked late. As she was on the way to approaching her house, Joseph rushed her and grabbed her by the head. He covered her mouth and said he would stab her if she screamed. He dragged the poor woman into his car and drove away. What happened next was unbelievably cruel. Joseph forced himself upon her over and over again and included all orifices. Joseph smacked and punched her and threatened to hit her over the head with a bottle of vodka that he had been drinking from. Joseph then forced the woman to perform all manner of acts upon him. He made her urinate on him and then he urinated in her mouth, forcing the woman to drink it. Joseph then threatened to make her eat his feces if she didn't call him daddy and say that she was a child to him throughout the ordeal. The psychological and physical torture was unparalleled, and it continued. For 14 hours, Joseph tormented the poor woman. He forced her back into his car. Joseph then pulled up to a school with the woman in the passenger seat and said that he wanted to be intimate with someone who was underage. Following this, he forced himself upon the woman again and threatened to kill her and dump her body in the canal where the DNA would be washed away. He also told the woman that he would lock her away and would never release her. Joseph then drove her to a McDonald's drive-thru and they were seen on CCTV together. As Joseph was driving around with this woman, he spotted another woman who was aged 21 and she was walking with her 18-year-old sister in North London. Joseph pulled up beside them and dragged the 21-year-old into the car. At this point, he already had the 25-year-old in the car, and he also attempted to grab the little sister, but he failed. Over the next 2 hours, the other 21-year-old was essayed in the worst possible ways. Joseph also forced the two women to engage in activities with each other. He threatened to slit their throats and throw them into the river if they caused any trouble. Despite the 21-year-old woman telling Joseph that she was a virgin due to her religious beliefs, he hit her until she removed her clothing. He subjected her to similar humiliations as the other woman in the car. With the two women inside the vehicle, Joseph then drove to a hotel. CCTV footage shows him outside this hotel, attempting to book a room. so he would be able to continue his vile attacks behind closed doors. When Joseph couldn't get the attention of any hotel workers, he went back to his car and was welcomed with a bottle of vodka smashed around his head. The two women left the car and ran towards some builders on the other side of the road. Joseph chased them on foot, but surrendered once they were in the vicinity of the builders. The two women were finally free. A very fortunate escape, but unfortunate for the next victims that Joseph decided to seek out. The police were contacted, and they suspected that it may be Joseph who was responsible. They offered a £20,000 reward for information on his whereabouts, and the hunt to find him began. In response, Joseph travelled up north to Manchester, where he would commit the remainder of his crimes. On the 5th of May 2019, in the early hours of the morning, Joseph approached a very drunk mother of two at a bar. He persuaded this woman to share a taxi with him under the guise that it would be safer to do so with him. When the taxi pulled up outside her home, Joseph got out too. But this time, he had no intentions with the mother. Instead, he had his eyes set on her children. Joseph entered the house with the woman, and by 7 a.m, he had her tied up to her bed with electrical cords. He then went into the next room and approached the 17-year-old daughter. What he did next was in the presence of her little 11-year-old brother. As he did with the previous victims in the car, he forced himself upon her in a sinister attack, resulting in lacerations at both private parts. Their mother could hear the screams coming from the room. Joseph then made the boy place parts of his body inside of Joseph. This went on for 3 hours and 20 minutes. Then, in an incredible act of bravery, the 17-year-old girl managed to escape by jumping out of an upstairs window naked. In doing so, she broke both of her heels, but she managed to get some help. This caused Joseph to flee, and he managed to escape again. 3 hours later, at 1:30 p.m, a lady aged 71 was in her car in a supermarket car park after completing some shopping in Greater Manchester. Joseph got into the front passenger seat, punched her in the face as hard as he could, and told her to drive. He claimed that he had a knife and had just killed someone. For the next 5 hours, this elderly lady was imprisoned in her own car. During that time, he essayed her and touched her private parts. 2 hours into the woman driving him around, at around 3:30, he forced her to pull up beside a group of 13-year-old children, 2 boys and 1 girl. He falsely accused the 3 children that they had been abusive and threatening to his sister on social media, and told them that they needed to get inside the vehicle. Joseph very quickly let the boys go, but he kept the girl hostage. With the 71-year-old woman driving, Joseph told the young girl that he loved her and that she was now his girlfriend. He began to forcibly kiss and touch her under her clothing. Traces of his male DNA were later found on her trousers. Joseph then made the woman pull into a service station, and with the help of the public, the elderly woman and the child managed to escape. Joseph quickly got into the elderly woman's car and drove away. He then snorted an illegal substance and consumed more alcohol. Only half an hour later, he abducted his next and final victims. As he was driving, Joseph spotted 2 14-year-old girls and pulled up beside them. He forced them into his car using the same manipulation techniques. He shouted at the 2 girls, saying that they had been bullying his sister, and said he would kill them if they didn't get into his car. He made a stop at a service station to purchase some condoms before driving off again. However, this time, the police had an ID on the car, as it belonged to the previous victim, the elderly woman. The vehicle was a Fiat Punto. Luckily, the police soon found the car, but panic ensued as they noticed 2 girls in the back seat. The police pursued Joseph, resulting in a high-speed chase. Joseph was driving on the wrong side of the road and hit a Mercedes at a roundabout. The chase led into a residential estate where Joseph crashed the car again and fled on foot. Luckily, the 2 girls were unharmed by the crashes. Then, a 9-hour-long manhunt took place searching the area for Joseph. The police then installed roadblocks, and Joseph was nearly caught when he attempted to go through a roadblock posing as a drunkard leaving a pub in a taxi with a pint glass in his hand. The police caught onto this and they asked him to raise his t-shirt, as Joseph was known to have a tattoo on his stomach. When the officer asked this, he ran away as fast as he could. Joseph then ran down a nearby country lane and hid up a tree. It didn't take long for the police to spot him, hiding from them like the coward he is. And with the use of a negotiator, Joseph was retrieved and was made to face his crimes. Joseph McCann was finally caught and was arrested for the damage he caused to 11 victims. The offences spanned 15 days. During the trial, many of the victims bravely stepped up to the stand to make sure he was put away for good. Impact statements from the victims expressed the long-lasting pain caused by him. One victim described how her life as she knew it was completely taken away. Another spoke of having her aspirations, both big and small, and her vision for the future violently stripped away from her. Generally, the victims lived daily with trauma that has severely impacted their ability to go out, sleep, work, socialize, or otherwise lead a normal life. Some have even had to move from the homes they once loved. Joseph was found guilty, and when he was to be sentenced, the judge made several statements. The judge described him as highly dangerous, a classic psychopath, and a violent bully. Throughout the trial, Joseph showed no remorse. When it came time to face his victims, he claimed he couldn't make it to the courtroom due to sleep deprivation and poor cell conditions. Like the rest of his mindless criminality, he had no regard for any other human, and this likely will never change. On the 9th of December 2019, Joseph was convicted of 37 separate criminal counts. These included false imprisonment, SA, assault, and rape. His sentencing was 33 life sentences to run concurrently, with a determinate sentence of 45 years. Although he is eligible for parole after 30 years. However, on the 11th of December 2020, the Solicitor General, Mr. M. Ellis QC, appealed the minimum 30-year tariff of Joseph McCann. The Solicitor General also appealed other minimum 30-year tariffs, such as the sentence of Reynard Sinaga and other such vile criminals. He appealed to the courts to increase their minimum sentences to 40 years, and this appeal was accepted. Joseph McCann's minimum sentence was changed from 30 years to 40 years, meaning that he will remain behind bars well into his 70s. The case of Joseph McCann is truly vile, and we can only hope that his parole appeals will be rejected in the future.